Vayichan sham Yisrael eged ha'ar kulanu ke'echad.
I wanted to focus on the psychology of happiness as it relates to the holiday Shavuos. I'm going to start with the overarching thought that happiness is an active, not a passive process. It's not just the absence of unhappiness, something you can actively pursue and facilitate. And it's not necessarily dependent on a lack of stressors or adversity. In fact, it's sometimes that at times of challenge and times of difficulty that we're most likely to encounter happiness. But there's a difference between happiness in terms of the secular concept and happiness in terms of the Jewish concept of simcha. Let me illustrate this with the example of the double enigma, two brief vignettes. One vignette is a vignette where it's a Chai Lifeline retreat, a retreat for families of children facing serious and sometimes even life-threatening illness. And it's Shabbos afternoon, and I'm sitting in a room with a group of parents who were there for a retreat. And one of the parents, a Hasidic guy, turns to the co-parents, who by now he's really connected to deeply, and says, you know something? This last Rosh Hashanah, I got the horrific news that my son was facing a serious form of leukemia. And 10 days later, on Yom Kippur, I'm sitting in Shul, and a wave of happiness washed over me like I hadn't experienced in my entire life. And I really didn't understand what he was talking about, except that all the other parents in the room, with tears in their eyes, nodded in agreement. I realized I have to rethink my understanding of simcha versus happiness. The second example is from the famous book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Dr. Frankl, a psychiatrist who was a physician in the concentration camp, was the doctor in a typhus ward. And there was a young woman, barely out of her adolescence, who was literally in the last minute of her life. And she calls over Dr. Frankl. She says, Dr. Frankl, let me tell you something. Until I came to this horrific place, I was a frivolous teenager. But now that I've gone through what I've gone through here, and I'm looking through the slats in the roof of this typhus ward, at God's beautiful world, at the blue sky, at the clouds, I feel connected in a way that I've never felt connected before. And I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. And she closes her eyes and dies. Vatischak liyom achro, finding happiness and joy in a place that one would never expect for there to be happiness or joy. Now let's compare this to the secular view of happiness. The secular view of happiness is the exact opposite. Secular view of happiness is based on the word HAP. So the prefix for happiness is hap. Think of other words that start with HAP. Hapless, haphazard, happenstance. It means b'mikra, by chance. And if you ask the average Westerner, the average American, the average Canadian, the average person who was raised with the philosophy, secular philosophy of the Western world, what is associated with happiness? Most people would say, if I only made a little more money, or if I won the lottery, then I'd be happy. And yet we all know, you don't need me to tell you, that we all know that true simcha, lasting simcha, has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with money. It's true that it doesn't hurt to have money. It's kind of hard to be happy and feel happy if your basic needs aren't met. But the research, actually largely done by Dr. Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for founding behavioral economics with the late Dr. Tversky. So he, in his research, clearly showed that once your basic needs are met, it makes absolutely no difference how much money you have. Okay? Because as we know, happiness is tied to connection. As Shlomo HaMelech tells us, Ohev kesef lo yispa kesef. The more you love money, the more you will not be satisfied by the money you have. I have a story, a vignette that I want to share with you that I often use as an example in these situations. It's the story of Robert Frank, a well-known economist. Robert Frank was a pretty well-off guy, and he was idealistic. So after he finished university, he volunteered to work for the Peace Corps, where he'd be able to volunteer to do like a Sherut Leumi kind of thing, to do a service for wherever they sent him. And they assigned him to go to Nepal. His plane lands in Nepal. Bus takes him on a long, long bus ride to the middle of Nepal, to a dirt poor region there. And they tell him, okay, we'll pick you up in a couple of years. And the first thing that hits him is that he's being asked to spend the next few years in a one-room hut with no running water and no electricity. And he's in a state of total yish. He's in a state of despair. He doesn't know how he's going to do it. He's almost ready to quit right then and there. Then he realizes that nobody else in that part of Nepal is living in any kind of a different kind of lifestyle. Everybody is living in a one-room hut with no running water and no electricity. And he writes that it didn't take him long to get completely used to this reality of Nepal, this reality of his new life. And he very quickly got used to it because there's something called the principle of relative deprivation. If the people around us are living one kind of lifestyle, we become used to it pretty quickly. But here's where the story gets interesting. After he's there for a while, he gets his first paycheck. And he realizes that he's going to be living now in this abject poverty by his old standards, but he's used to it, and he's teaching and having meaning and purpose in what he's doing there, teaching the poor children of Nepal. But he gets his first paycheck, and it's for $40 for the month. And now he's in a state of total yish, of total despair. Because he says to himself, you know, I'll tell you right here in this neighborhood, if you gave your kids $40 a week for allowance, there's some children in parts of the area where my practice is who would call the Child Protective Services to report parents for child abuse because of giving them such a small allowance. Only saying that slightly tongue-in-cheek. It's not so far off. So he figures, that's it. I'm going to have to find a way to get back home. I can't possibly live on $40 a month. It's impossible. But then he discovers that everybody else in that part of Nepal is living on $30 a month. So he's making $10 more a month than anybody else. And he goes on to say that he never felt wealthier in his life than he did living on $40 a month in a one-room hut with no running water and no electricity. And I think there's an incredible mussar in that. As we're living through this time of a pandemic, what's the answer to the double enigma? How could that young woman in the last minute of her life have been besimcha? How could that Hasidic guy at the Chai Lifeline retreat, 10 days after his son's ominous diagnosis, be in a place of simcha? And the answer is basically given both by the psychological research, but to me most beautifully by the Chazon Ish, who says, for he who knows the light of truth, there's no sadness in the world. I'll say it again. For he who knows the light of truth, there's no sadness in the world. That young woman in the last minute of her life was connected to the light of truth. She was connected in a deep way to spirituality, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. She was connected to the essence of happiness. And that chassid, sitting in shul on Yom Kippur, was surrounded by what we know is the 3 F's of happiness. What are the 3 F's of happiness according to the psychological research? Family, friends, and faith. So I just wanted to focus on that for a little bit and bring my remarks a little bit to talking about the power of gratitude, of hakaras hatov at a time like this. I can't emphasize it enough. In study after study after study, we're told, first of all, that happiness and chesed are the 2 superpowers that we all have and can bring to our daily life, that it will be associated with enduring simcha. What do I mean by that? If on every night of Yontif, we go around our table, our Yontif table, and we have every member of our family or anybody who's with us for Yontif review what is it that you have to be grateful for in this past week. Come up with 5 things that you're grateful for. Count your blessings. And if you count your blessing, the research shows a few things happen. Your immune functions improve. It's a very powerful way of stabilizing even your cardiac functioning. That may sound like pseudoscience, but in some of the leading peer-reviewed cardiology journals, they find that counting your blessings has unique health benefits and even improves your sleep. But most importantly for now, it puts you in a different place. And there's always something to be grateful for. You may find it hard to be grateful when you're cooped up in a small apartment, or you're feeling incredible anxiety about having lost your job or other kinds of ongoing financial pressures, or you're concerned, even more ominously, about people you've lost, or concerned about your health or the health of those you love. And the key to this component of happiness is to recognize that we always have control over this aspect of simcha, the aspect of hakaras hatov. So you count your blessings. And if you're having a hard time finding what to be grateful for, that's fine. You have a right. Give yourself permission to be human. You have a right to have difficulty finding that, but there's always something to look at. There's something to be hopeful for. The Hebrew word tikva is tied to the word kav, the Hebrew word for a line, a rope, meaning we're not twisting in the wind alone. There's always a connection between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the connection between us and ourselves in terms of our Bein Adam La'atzmo. And as long as we could function and focus on that aspect of what we know is tied to simcha, we should be zocha to be able to have an enduring kind of simcha. So I just wanted to focus on that component for a bit and share with you 2 stories to conclude. First, a brief thought that I learned from my Rabbi Dr. David Fox, but it's a beautiful thought that the Nesiva Shalom brings down, the Slonimer brings down on Yeshuasa Kivisi Hashem. And this is something that I think many of us have been hearing lately, but it's just so powerful when you think about it. So in the Bereshis Rabbah, it says, Yisurin B'kivui, okay? Going through tough times, such as like the tough times that we're going for. We have to be Makabel B'kivui, with that hope, with that cord, with that rope thrown out to us. Geula ha'asida tiyeh b'kivui. Our future geula, should God willing, be with kivui, with hope, and with the recognition that we're not alone. And when we do that and we focus, again, on a smile that you might have experienced from your family member or people who are locked down with you over Yontif. That's the source of kivui. When you experience that with being grateful to your children, just for being your children, or grateful to a spouse for giving you whatever kind of support they're giving, even if it's imperfect, that's all at the core. That's all at the core of what we look for. And let me end with a story. And it goes, story that I was just thinking about that I think gets to the core of this. Maybe two stories. Forgive me. I often get carried away. Here's story number one. Story number one on the power of gratitude as the source of a simcha, which the research constantly shows, is the story of a group that had been inviting me to give a talk at their Chisa conference for families of children who have serious kinds of physical and cognitive challenges. And it's people who are raising children who are really in a very, very tough place. These are people who are struggling with basically with survival in some ways. And it's a life sentence for parents. And they have a Shabbos every year or two for chizuk. And they had wanted me to come. There's a group of Hasidim, and I totally unfairly, I told them they were going after me for 5 years to come there. And I said, look, I'm a modern guy. I don't know how comfortable you'll be with me. I'm a YU guy. I said, look at this yarmulke. And I'm not so sure that I'm the right match for you, And they kept after me in a very, very sweet way. They didn't give up. They had continued hope. And finally, they wore me down. They finally wore me down. And of course, it became one of the most meaningful Shabbatot that I've had in memory ever. It was an amazing experience. And we have, by the way, they did kind of see me as not quite fitting in completely to their world. One of them referred to me as Hasidei Umo Sa'ola. And I don't think they meant it negatively. They meant that I'm a good guy, but they are not used to hanging out with people like me, but they were clearly open to whatever it is I had to offer. And it was an amazing Shabbos. Friday night, we had a tish. We're singing. It was incredibly spiritual moments. These are people who are literally right in there with unbelievable kind of challenge. And now it's about 2:00 in the morning, and the man who had invited me said, Dr. Pelcovitz, could my wife and I meet with you? Just want to talk to you a little bit. So I said, of course, that's why I'm here. We go to the corner of the hotel, the lobby of the hotel that we were in, and he tells me, I have an 8-year-old daughter. She was born 8 years ago. And she was born with unbelievable kind of physical challenges. I was told she would never talk, she would never walk. But for me, the toughest thing is I was told she would never be able to sit up. She had a spinal stenosis that meant she wasn't going to be able to even sit on a wheelchair, to be able to meet people eye to eye, face to face, kamayim hapanim el panim, with eyes bouncing off each other, with hearts bouncing off each other. And he said it was completely an unbelievable kind of challenge. But then, when she was a couple of years old, he heard about a program that was experimental in Europe where they did physical therapy on kids with this condition. And a certain percentage, if they responded, you can't cure the condition, but they could be taught to sit up safely. So instead of spending their lives lying down and not looking people in the eye, they could learn how to sit in a wheelchair. He immediately flies to Europe. And he immediately has the physical therapist there meet with them. And he's there for many months. It turns out she's a responder. He says, it's amazing. And it's clear that she's a responder, but he has to go back home. He has to make a living. He has to support his family. He has to be there with his wife and many other children. So he begs the physical therapist, teach me how to do this therapy. And he says, look, I have they tell him, you told us you only have a third grade secular education. You have many years of education in advanced Talmudic studies, but you only have a secular education that's very limited. You need to know anatomy for this. We can't teach you. And as I learned, this man will not give up. He has unbelievable kind of grit and persistence. It's a source of godless and a source of simcha, by the way, in terms of what grit does for our happiness level. And he also wore them down. They teach him how to do it. And he comes home, he teaches his wife how to do this physical therapy. And now the girl is 8 years old. And he says, we've been working on her nonstop. And now, is it okay if I introduce you to my daughter? And he calls to the other side of the hotel lobby, where a counselor wheels over this clearly impaired 8-year-old girl who is sitting up, miraculously is sitting up. And she flashes all three of us $1 million smile that we all meet with tears of joy. Since that day, when I every morning say the bracha of Zokev Kefufim, I have a simcha and a connection to this that to me is the guts of the core of simcha, the way gratitude, it's just we, as my father would call it, the ordeal of the ordinary. We tend to have hergol. We tend to have habituation to that which we take for granted. And from that day on, I say that bracha with a special kind of kavanah. And now I'll end with the final story, which is a story about a Rosh Chodesh experience in the lobby of the Shaarei Tzedek Hospital on Rosh Chodesh. Heard this from Dr. Rosner. From Rabbi Rosner. So Rabbi Rosner told over this amazing story that just makes a difference to me in these times in terms of this simcha component that we have now as we're going to Simchas Yontif, which is all about connection to the 3 F's, connection to ourselves, connection to others, but bringing in Hakaras Tov and bringing in Chesed as a source of simcha. By the way, to the extent that we ask our kids to do chores around the house and we help others out and do Chesed, it's a cornerstone of resilience at a time like this and a cornerstone of simcha as well. Here's the final story, and then I'll wish you all a good Yontif. I was at a talk where I heard this again from Harav Rosner. And he talks about a man, prominent Rav, every Rosh Chodesh, goes to the lobby of Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. And in the lobby of Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, he just sits there in the lobby, every Rosh Chodesh. And he doesn't go to visit anybody. But he seems to just be staring at the signs. Nobody knows what he's doing because he doesn't go in to visit anybody. And he goes there every Rosh Chodesh for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. He's just there for hours. And then he goes home. Finally, somebody goes up to him because it was a puzzle. What's he doing? And they say, Rabbi, we hope this isn't disrespectful, but what are you doing here every Rosh Chodesh, just being in the lobby and staring at the signs? What's it about? And he says something that I think we have to hold on to. He says, it's easy to be grateful to the people who do an unexpected chesed for us. It's easy to be grateful to the person who helps us change a flat tire on a highway, or somebody who, we're elderly, delivers packages for us in times of a pandemic. It's much more challenging to be grateful to those who we owe the most to. That's what the research shows. There's hergel. It's harder to be grateful to a parent, to a grandparent, to a spouse, to a child. Hergel takes over, and that's just the way it goes. Okay, again, I told you, my father would say, the ordeal of the ordinary. So he says, I reset my clock every Rosh Chodesh. I'll come, and first I'll stare at the cardiology side. And I'll think about all the people here who are recovering from bypass surgery, or maybe have COVID-related cardiac challenges, or who are having congestive heart failure. And I just think and I focus and say a silent bracha to myself about the miracle of me, even though I'm an older man, having a well-functioning heart. Then I'll stare at the gastroenterology side. I'll say to myself, like, wow, this is pretty amazing. If even one part of my GI system that should be closed is open, or that should be open is closed, I couldn't survive for even 1 minute in front of you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for a well-functioning GI system, when I know in this hospital there are many people struggling with all kinds of gastrointestinal disorders. And then I do the same with neurology, and I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for a well-functioning mind. I know there's so many people in the neurology department with dementia, or with Alzheimer's, or with chas v'shalom, with brain tumors. And after I spend however many hours it takes, just focusing on all of the gifts I have that I take for granted, I go back home with my batteries recharged, because Hakaras Tov is so incredibly central to Simcha, and especially to Simchas Yantiv. So may we all be zocha to be able to take that core lesson of what Shavuos is about, what Simchas Yantiv is about, and may we all be zocha to have literally a refuas hanefesh and a refuas haguf. Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity.